Dear friends, I welcome you to my channel. I am Taras Berezovets. Today we will discuss the results of the recently concluded presidential elections in Moldova, where the incumbent president Maya Sandu won after a tough and exhausting campaign in the second round. And this is undoubtedly a victory today, not only for the incumbent president, but also for all European forces, including Ukraine, and we watched with great concern the campaign in which the Kremlin intervened most actively. The attempt in the first round to buy 300,000 votes by Kremlin tricksters was, fortunately, thwarted, and they tried to do the same in the second round. However, the votes of Moldovan citizens abroad played a key role here, ensuring a confident victory for Maya Sandu with a 10% margin. It should be noted that the campaign of the losing candidate did not recognize this. The victory was not handled in a European way, nor in a masculine way. They could not lose with dignity. And essentially, one cannot expect anything else from a pro-Kremlin figure. It probably wasn't necessary to be pro-Kremlin in this situation. Meanwhile, Moscow is granting its citizenship to various mercenaries, as reported by the Russian Ministry of Internal Affairs, specifically mentioning the figure, a beautiful number, 3344. 3344 foreigners received citizenship of Russia for participating in the criminal war against Ukraine. Last week, the British publication Financial Times reported on secret negotiations between Ukraine and Russia regarding the conclusion of a peace agreement. Today, this is being done by the leading German publication Die Zeit, which reported that the relevant negotiations are being conducted with the participation of foreign intermediaries are being discussed, particularly the format, location, and date of such a dialogue. This information has not been officially confirmed. Last week, Peskov stated that such rumors should not be believed at all. Meanwhile, the American corporation Google inadvertently revealed the locations of military facilities and weapons on its satellite images of Ukrainian territory, particularly the American Patriot systems. This was reported in the Center for Countering Disinformation at the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine. Screenshots of military facilities in Ukraine have already been published by a number of Z channels. In particular, it concerns the publication of the locations of FAS, Patriot, air defense systems, on the territory of Kyiv. Meanwhile, British intelligence reported on the problems faced by North Korean mercenaries in the war against Ukraine. Applause. Putin rules Russians to die for North Korea. This follows from paragraph 4 of the Strategic Cooperation Agreement that he signed together with Kim in June 2024. Predictions have already emerged that North Korea will definitely cash this check and will turn to Putin for assistance when it decides to unleash war against South Korea. And that is when Russians will go far away, to fulfill, as they like to say, their international duty in reality, to die for the geopolitical desires of Putin and Kim Jong-un. Meanwhile, the first North Korean mercenaries have already come under fire in the Kursk region. Patriot. Kirill Gundyaev stated the necessity of reinstating the death penalty in Russia, and he even said that this fully aligns with the norms of Christian morality. I will say no, it does not agree. And finally, Orban made a new scandalous statement in support of Trump on the eve of the presidential elections in the US, which will take place tomorrow. Friends, we will talk about all this further. Thus, according to the official statement from the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Russia, specifically from the official representative Irina Volk, since the beginning of 2024, Russia has granted its citizenship to 3,344 foreigners based on a decree by Putin that allows for the issuance of passports to participants of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, as well as to their family members. The message from the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Russia does not specify. It only concerns military personnel or their family members, including a similar law was adopted in Russia in 2022. I would also like to remind you that today is celebrated in Russia as the so-called Day of National Unity. The feat of Minin and Pozharsky, we remember this entire story, largely inflated, so to speak, intertwined with lies and historical falsifications. But nevertheless, in a country like Russia, to speak of national unity is, at the very least, ridiculous, considering the overall level of racism, xenophobia, and hatred towards individuals of other nationalities and faiths, while Russia itself is a pure embodiment of evil and certainly not a unity. However, to lie to someone's face is to call black white. This is not the first time for Russians. Their authorities have always done this throughout the entire history of the Moscow Kingdom, the Russian Empire, then during the period of the Soviet Union, and finally now in the Russian Federation. Meanwhile, the second decisive round of the presidential elections took place in Moldova, where the incumbent president Maya Sandu won. After processing almost 100% of the protocols, Sandu receives 55.41% of the votes. Her opponent, the candidate from the Socialist Party and former Attorney General of Moldova, Alexander Stoyanoglu, receives 44.59%. The overall turnout was 54%, a record figure for both voting in Moldova itself and at overseas polling stations. According to the initial results received from the residents of Moldova, without the overseas polling stations, the candidate was winning with 51% of the votes. However, in the end, he lost when the data from the overseas polling stations came in, where Maya Sandu achieved a convincing victory. She has already been congratulated by the head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, President of France, Emmanuel Macron, Prime Minister of Romania, Marcel Ciolacu, and other representatives from our side. In the first round, I remind you that Maya Sandu received 42 and 45, while Stoyanoglu received 2,598. With a narrow margin of 95.98, the supporter of Euro integration managed to win, as literally everything was decided by the percentage of votes. 50.35% supported his integration, while 49.65% opposed it. The candidate himself reportedly ran a rather weak campaign, according to local media. He gave the impression of a man who simply made a mistake at the door. Ultimately, his headquarters refused to acknowledge the election results, calling Sandu an illegitimate president and stating that Maya Sandu lost within the country, where he received 51.19% of the votes from the residents of Moldova, but completely lost in the overseas districts. Nevertheless, Maya Sandu's victory gives hope now that this country, following Georgia, will not fall into the clutches of the Moscow beast. Indeed, next year there will be decisive parliamentary elections in Moldova, and therefore the Kremlin will obviously throw all its efforts into ensuring the necessary outcome. Moreover, the pro-Kremlin party named Victory has already been established at a congress in Moscow, and it is uniting around the pro-Kremlin criminal oligarch Ilan Shor. He is actively sponsored by Moscow and is supported by representatives of various clans, including the GGU clan. Naturally, Transnistria will try to play a role in these elections, and therefore, unfortunately, the battle is not over. The battle for the presidential elections has been won, but everything will be decided next year. However, unlike in Georgia, the Kremlin has not managed to achieve any movement here. The attempts at reversing European integration were evident, as a huge sum was thrown into the effort, at least tens, and more likely hundreds of millions of US dollars were spent to buy 300,000 votes in the first round of the presidential elections. Ultimately, we see that the Kremlin did not succeed in its tasks, although we understand it was close to achieving the result. They tried to falsify the turnout, particularly at many overseas polling stations, especially in Russia, where it was simply off the charts. However, in the end, they failed to achieve the necessary result and defeat the pro-European president Maya Sandu. This result will undoubtedly benefit Ukraine, as having a pro-Kremlin leader and a government that has taken a crooked path like Georgia's in its rear would be undesirable for Ukraine. It would create additional problems, including ensuring our security. It would obviously require closer attention from the military leadership and intelligence services of Ukraine to everything that is happening now in Moldova. Nevertheless, it is still too early to relax, as I emphasize once again, since the Kremlin has not abandoned its plans to bring Moldova back into its own orbit, as it has already succeeded in the case of several post-Soviet states, particularly Georgia. Therefore, the current result is intermediate, and everything will be decided in any case in the next elections. Parliamentary elections, as the power of the president is limited according to the Constitution of Moldova. Essentially, this is not a classic president, at least not in the understanding of, let's say, the French model of democracy or the American one. Therefore, the president relies in any case on a parliamentary majority, and now she will need to secure stable support in the next convocation of the Parliament of Moldova. Meanwhile, the leading German publication Decide, following the British Financial Times, reported on the fact of non-public negotiations between the delegations of Kiev and Moscow aimed at determining possible mutual concessions. Decide refers to its own informed sources. The previous publication by the Financial Times was long denied by Putin's spokesperson Dmitry Peskov, who claimed that it was all fake. And one must not believe this under any circumstances. Nevertheless, a second publication, which certainly cannot be called sensationalist, provides relevant information that makes us at least consider the possibility of such consultations. According to information from DCT, the discussion includes a mutual restraint on strikes against energy infrastructure, further exchange of prisoners of war, the resumption of the grain deal, and the return, the abduction of Ukrainian children, and the future of annexed Crimea, according to the data from the decentralized previous rounds of negotiations that took place in Kiev, looks somewhat sensational. How could this have happened, except perhaps via video link in Copenhagen and other cities? Representatives from the G7 countries and China were present at these meetings. At least this had not been reported earlier, although the fact of conducting, so to speak, peaceful consultations in Davos, Copenhagen, and Riga was indeed true. That is, there is no mention of the presence of Russia here. It is only stated that besides Ukraine, representatives of the G7 and China were present. Furthermore, the issue of possible peace negotiations, practically resolved between the two countries, is reported by DZI. And now the format, location, and date of such a dialogue are being discussed. Fernand Taras reported that such negotiations have resumed with the mediation of the Qatari government. They concern the cessation of strikes on energy infrastructure, according to the Financial Times. The relevant agreement to refrain from strikes on energy facilities was reached back in the fall of 2023. The Italian publication La Repubblica also reported that the German Federal Chancellor Olaf Scholz has a corresponding plan, which is carefully and thoroughly developing it based on the previous Minsk agreements. However, Ukraine has stated that it refuses to conclude any agreement that would involve territorial concessions. Meanwhile, the American corporation Google updated satellite images of the territory of Ukraine and inadvertently revealed the locations of military facilities, particularly at Kyiv airport. Giuliani reportedly has air defense systems, according to the reset maps. Google has already been criticized for this by the Center for Countering Disinformation under the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine. In particular, they stated that they reached out to Google to request a quick correction. And unfortunately, the corresponding images have already appeared in Z channels. They also identified the air defense systems as American surface-to-air missile systems. Patriot. New images were taken according to updated data from September 28, 2023. Well, at least these are images that are at least a year old. The previous images were taken in April 2022. A satellite image of the Starokonstantinov airport in the Khmelnytsky region has reportedly appeared on Google Maps, more commonly known by its abbreviation, Starcon. The image shows hangars, military facilities, and also airplanes. The Google Corporation uses images from the American space company Maxar for its mapping service and its main clients. This is the National Reconnaissance Office, NRO, of the United States and the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, NGA. Google. In response to Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, it disabled a number of tools in its mapping service. However, at the moment there has been some kind of unclear failure, but in any case with unpleasant consequences. Meanwhile, British intelligence, commenting on the possibility of the transfer, well, let's say the fact of the transfer of North Korean mercenaries to Russia, stated that they will face a number of serious problems, among which in particular, problems with the use of Russian weaponry, integration into the command structure of Russia, and the language barrier with Russian military personnel. Nevertheless, British intelligence points out that military support from North Korea in the war against Ukraine has been a key driver of partnership for Russia, and is now focused on the supply of weapons from North Korea. It has also become known that Russia supplied a significant amount of rice to North Korea, specifically regarding the delivery of 700 tons of rice, whereas such supplies were previously estimated at a maximum of 100 tons per year. Moreover, for each North Korean mercenary sent to Russia, Kim Jong-un's regime will receive about 2,000. Thus, the total amount of sending 10,000 military personnel will allow them to receive more than $200 million a year, and most likely this amount will be received in cash. North Korea, in turn, may demand Russia's participation in the war on the side of the DPRK after sending DPRK soldiers to participate in the war against Ukraine. This was stated by the former South Korean ambassador to Russia, Vaisong Lak. He stated that it is known that North Korea is fighting on the side of Russia. If a war ever breaks out on the Korean peninsula, North Korea now. He stated in an interview with the Korea Herald that he will rely on Russia to come and help. Similar assumptions have also been expressed by a number of other experts, in particular experts from the Institute for National Security Strategy of South Korea. It has been noted that there is a kind of exchange happening with North Koreans going to Russia, and then Putin will likely have to send them back, sending their soldiers to the slaughter on the Korean peninsula if North Korea indeed starts an open war with South Korea or Japan. There is no doubt that Putin will make and accept the appropriate decisions. He has sufficient resources for this, including private military companies, as well as, shall we say, battered elite units and special forces. And the speech, as always, may go, as they used to say in Soviet propaganda, limited. The military contingent that is being sent to fulfill international duty, however, North Korea will not be able to pay Russia anything since it is impoverished. A portion of rice, or at most some dog meat, is all that Russian soldiers can expect. But the very fact that Russians are likely to be thrown by Putin into other international conflicts is noteworthy enough to warrant a separate emphasis. Meanwhile, North Korean mercenaries have already come under fire in the Kursk region. This was also reported by the Center for Counteracting Disinformation of the National Security and Defense of Ukraine. They did not provide details of this incident. It is also unknown. When this happened, it was reported today, with the information being available on Monday. However, it is clear that the clarification of the consequences of this shelling will become known a bit later. Meanwhile, against the backdrop of the ongoing war in Ukraine, Patriarch Kirill, also known as Gundyayev, stated that the Russian Orthodox Church considers it permissible to take a person's life as punishment for crimes. Moreover, Gundyayev stated that Jesus Christ did not condemn the death penalty. Of course, killing a person and the punishment for his crimes is an extreme measure, but in the Word of God, there are such words: remove the evil from among yourselves. This means that if a person is extremely dangerous to society and cannot be isolated in any way, he needs to be removed. What words to remove? Just listen. This is how even a non-cleric speaks. It is purely the lexicon of special services. In fact, the collaboration of Kirill Gundyayev with the Soviet Special Services, the Committee for State Security, and later with the Russian Special Services has never been questioned. Many experts from the Russian Federation agree that the rhetoric needs to be cleaned up, and furthermore, I would look to eliminate them, or in the end, just get rid of them as it is necessary to use. There is indeed an English variant for this, to get rid of them in the toilet. By the way, Putin himself has spoken out against lifting the moratorium on the death penalty. Paradoxically, it is precisely his Pop Gundyayev who wants to lift this very moratorium. And finally, the elections in the USA. The decisive election will take place tomorrow. More than 70 million Americans have already voted early. This number will obviously continue to grow until tomorrow. It is quite possible that we may not know the election results by the morning of November 6th, but Orban is already making further statements in support. Trump's candidate, by the way, this could all drag on under foreign interference. None of the other foreign leaders allow themselves such liberties. Hungary, which continues to be the president of the European Union until the end of 2024, believes that Europe will have to reconsider its support for Ukraine if Trump wins the presidential elections in the United States. Orban stated this the day before. He also believes that Trump's victory will change the course of the United States towards a peace agreement. In this case, the European Union will not be able to bear the burden of war alone. Everyone will have to adapt. The question of the appropriateness of supporting Ukraine should be discussed at the European Union summit in Budapest at the end of next week, stated Orban. Earlier, he was criticized by leaders of the European Union for unauthorized trips and meetings with Putin and Xi Jinping. Well, let's see what scandal awaits us next week. At the EU summit in Budapest, I feel it will not be easy. It will be heated, and at the very least, Orban will face criticism, I think, from many other European leaders for his departure from democratic principles and for what he allows himself. Such statements are made without coordinating with the leadership of the European Union, and he is obliged to do so. That's the news we have for today, friends. Thank you for watching this video. Subscribe to the channel, like, share, and comment on the broadcast. Don't forget to recommend the video to friends and acquaintances. Thank you to all the sponsors, partners, and friends of the channel who can expect pleasant exclusive surprises very soon. Just for them, we already have on my channel. We are preparing, stay tuned for announcements in the very near future, and traditionally, glory to Ukraine, friends. Glory to the Ukrainian Special Forces. This was Major of the Ukrainian Army Taras Berezovets. Until we meet again, goodbye.